Welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Triumph Trident 660. As always, let's jump on it, go for a ride, and see what it's all about. Right, Triumph Trident 660. As always, let's talk about some specs, shall we? Now, one thing to keep in mind, this bike comes in two separate trims. You have a full power model and you have a detuned / LAMS model, which is what we're on today. That is the only model available to the Australian and New Zealand markets, so not exactly sure why we don't get the full power model. So something to bear in mind, there'll be differences in power and torque figures, but in terms of the engine, basically the same liquid cooled 660cc inline triples, a 3-cylinder, and that's all coupled up to a 6-speed transmission. And I gotta say, first up, that transmission, it doesn't shift as smoothly as I was expecting, to be quite honest. It doesn't feel clunky such as a transmission that you find on a typical cruiser bike, but it just feels a little bit, I don't know, clumsy almost. It doesn't snick into gear as silky and smoothly as I was expecting, particularly from a brand such as Triumph. So it's something to keep in mind. But in terms of the power, oh my gosh, does this thing have power. And the only way I could really describe the power, it is surgical, just the way it builds up that torque. Man, I just love it. This engine puts out about 53 horsepower and about 59 newton meters of torque, and I gotta say, it is so incredibly refined. And even though this is a stock exhaust, you can really hear that engine note of the triple, the way it just sings. Man, oh man, I love it so much. If you were to compare this to a bike such as, say, the MT-07, that bike is like a hammer and this is like a scalpel. You know, it's just so, feels so sharp and refined in terms of the power. Oh man, even though it hits its peak at about 5,000 RPM, it is absolutely insane just how it moves. You know, it just feels, it's that surge of torque, and it just, the performance is absolutely insane in my opinion. That really translates over to the way this thing handles as well. Now, all of that is complemented by your tire and suspension package. So up front you got 41mm upside down forks courtesy of Showa. That's coupled to your front wheel, which is a 120/70 tire, 17-inch rim, and out back you got yourself a monoshock, again by Showa, with preload adjustment. And that's coupled to your rear wheel, which is a 120/55 17-inch rim. And I just gotta say, overall, for the most part, this is a very neutral, very stable bike, whether you're pottering about like this on your local neighborhood roads, or if you're, cruising around on the highway, although you're probably better off having some sort of windshield to help with the wind deflection. But in terms of actual stability, boy, does this thing feel so stable and neutral when you're riding about. However, the moment you crack on and you start to get a little bit, a little bit flamboyant, a little bit overzealous with your riding, boy, does this thing transform. It is so incredibly nimble and agile. You can just throw it around. It's almost telepathic, literally. You just think in the direction you want to go, and this bike will just dart off in that direction without any sort of hesitation. Man. And you couple that with the way this bike delivers its power, it makes for such an intoxicating and giggle-inducing experience. I absolutely love it, and it just feels so planted on the road. And keep in mind, this bike weighs 189 kilos wet weight. That is about 10 kilos more than my MT-07, but somehow it is able to just throw that weight around without any sort of care in the world. It is so funny. Despite that weight, you know, that 189 kilos, the brakes are actually pretty decent. Up front you got twin 310mm discs that are clamped by a Nissan 2-piston caliper. Out back, Nissan caliper again is a single piston that clamps onto a single 255mm disc. And honestly, I normally tend to say that the rear brakes on most motorcycles tend to not be as powerful as you'd expect, and this is definitely the case with my MT-07, but I was actually strangely surprised as to the braking power of this. It just, you know, I rarely see myself, you know, putting two fingers on the front brake, you know, to assist me with bringing myself to a stop like I do with the MT-07. So props to Triumph there in the brakes department. They've done a very good job, and the ride overall, it's fairly decent. It's not going to be as plush as, say, a cruiser bike, but I would say it's definitely more comfortable ever so slightly than my MT-07. And the same can be said about the seat. You know, coming back to ride quality, it's fairly comfortable. When I picked this up, I rode about an hour back to my place, which, by the way, picked this up from Time On Bikes. I will link them down below. Family owned business, lovely folks, do go check them out. And honestly, yeah, about an hour's ride, and when I got off it, I didn't feel any sort of soreness. You know, I would definitely say it's a little bit more comfortable than my MT-07. So, you know, for medium to relatively long distance riding, you shouldn't have any issue. Of course, if you're gonna do some really long distances like a road trip, few hundred kilometers, definitely you're going to want to invest in some sort of comfort liner or comfort seat, as I always say. But overall, pretty decent. Seat height 805 millimeters. I'm about 172 centimeters in height, whatever that is in feet and inches, 5'6", 5'7", somewhere along those lines. And honestly, I have no trouble flat footing this at all. No tippy toe action going on, so absolutely a breeze to flat foot this and move the bike around and stabilize yourself. So if you're a little bit shorter than me, you shouldn't have any sort of issues. And of course, if you're if you're taller, you won't have any issues at all. And riding position wise, fairly upright riding position as with most naked bikes, but I find with Triumph's Street Triple line of bikes and their derivatives like the Trident, you do have a little bit of a lean, you know, just ever so slightly. Overall, it's a fairly ergonomic bike. Speaking of ergonomics, let's talk about that instrument cluster. Very different to what I'm used to. Fully digital. You got yourself two TFT displays flanked by this sort of circular bezel, and you have access to a copious amount of information through the use of this directional pad and the selection button as well. You can cycle through using the up and down arrows, and you have your gear indicator, your trips, green brightness, your service interval, your coolant temperature, and finally your fuel status, which segues nicely to the fuel range. 14-liter fuel tank. And I had a bit of trouble trying to find a concrete fuel economy number for this detuned / LAMS version of this bike. However, I looked on Triumph UK's website, and they state that the full power version will get you about 4.5 liters per 100 kilometers. That's somewhere around, I think, 60 miles per gallon. There are some other articles out there with the specs on this bike that report less than that. So just take it with a grain of salt. I would say whichever model that you end up getting, expect around 250 to about 300 kilometers on a full tank. And that's based off just riding very averagely. Of course, if you ride like a bat out of hell, you can you can expect a lot less than that. And finally, real quick, let's talk about design. Overall, pretty handsome looking bike in my opinion. Probably not the best looking bike in the world, but I appreciate the vintage nods here and there, like the circular headlight, the circular bezel of the instrument cluster. And I also appreciate the fact that there is no stock protrusion hanging off the, you know, the rear seat that normally holds the number plate. Triumph has opted to go for a rear-wheeled fender instead, and sometimes, yeah, stock rear-wheel fenders on from manufacturers can be quite phallical as well, but Triumph have done a very good job and made it a very clean and tidy design overall. I like the way the seat actually tapers off towards the back. It's very sharp. The only thing that really spoils the line, these mirrors. They provide good visibility, but they do spoil the lines of the bike a little bit, but you can always fix that with some aftermarket mirrors. Definitely some downward facing ones would look absolutely top notch and really clean up this bike's overall design. Yeah, so I don't know, what do you guys think? Overall sounds like a good package, doesn't it? And in my opinion, yes, it's a very decent package. Feels very refined and sharp. However, there is one glaring issue with this bike. If you know, you know. But the Triumph Trident has a bit of an issue where the engine cuts out during certain situations. Usually when you're coming to a stop and you're pulling in the clutch. Now, I've been able to recreate this twice so far. It's been really bizarre. The first scenario, I was going downhill, I was in 5th gear, and I thought, let me change down to 4th, and just so I can use the engine braking to slow me down. Normally I blip the throttle in between downshifts. However, in this instance, I just pull the clutch in and just change gear without blipping the throttle, and in that split moment in between pulling the clutch and changing gear, the engine RPMs drop, which is normal behavior. You know, when you pull in your clutch, the engine RPM drops. However, what was abnormal was the engine dropped to idle and then went below it, and then the engine just turned off. Very peculiar, very strange. I've never ever seen this sort of a situation before. And then the second one was when I was coming up to a set of traffic lights. It went from green to yellow, and I was contemplating beating the yellow light, but I thought last moment, no, I'm not going to risk it. And so I did what I would normally do in that situation. I pull in the clutch and apply equal amounts of pressure on the front and rear brakes to bring me to a stop fairly quickly. And again, when I pulled in the clutch, the engine RPMs drop completely fine, and then they dropped below idle and the engine died. It was very strange, very peculiar. And so I did a little bit of, you know, digging around on the Google machine, and I happened upon the Trident forum. So if you're from the Trident forum, hello. And I'll leave a link down below to the particular thread that I was reading in regards to this issue. It doesn't seem to affect every single bike. It only affects a certain batch. It seems the first batch of bikes potentially. And from what I can tell, the issue lies with the map sensor, particularly this rubber tube that has a restrictor plate in it. And this restrictor plate apparently gets clogged up with oil, which, number one, I don't know how oil gets in that tube in the first place, but because of that buildup of oil and residue in that little restrictor plate, it actually then in turn sends incorrect data to the ECU, which then in certain situations, usually when you pull in the clutch, tells the engine to shut off completely. It is very bizarre, and I don't know why the bike has been designed like that. Now, I would say it's personal preference whether this is a major issue to you, because when the engine dies, it's quite simple to just turn it back on. You just keep the clutch in, run the starter, bike fires back up, and you're on your way. And like I said, it seems to be like an intermittent issue, and in my experience of riding this so far, I've had this for about just under a week, and I've ridden it only a handful of times, and in that time I've only experienced it at 1% of my riding. The rest, 99% of my riding experience has been completely normal, especially when I ride normally, and I rev match when I downshift. Don't run into that issue whatsoever. So something to keep in mind. However, in saying that, I do think, in my opinion, it can be a little bit disconcerting, you know, to have your bike just magically turn off on you in a situation where you just do not expect it to. Take for example, you're in traffic or even going around a roundabout, to have the bike just turn off on you when you're conducting a normal action such as pulling in the clutch lever can be very alarming. So just bear that in mind. From what I've read on the forums with all the people that have experienced this issue, it's actually staggering to me that Triumph is not officially acknowledging the problem as far as I'm aware. So Triumph, if you're listening, which I highly doubt because I'm just a pokey little YouTuber on this platform, but if you do happen to be watching and listening, kindly please acknowledge this issue publicly and acknowledge the fact that this is an inherent design flaw of this bike, and please issue a damn permanent fix. And breathe. Oh my goodness. Well, I think that's pretty much where we're going to leave it, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed this. Particularly my rant towards the end. It's golden hour here, the sun is setting, and I think that's a rather poignant way to wrap up this video. I really hope you guys enjoy this. As always, please do hit that like button, and if you're not subscribed, please do consider subscribing. I would very much appreciate it. Thank you to all of you who've left likes and comments and subscribed to the channel so far. Really appreciate all your support, and yeah, do leave your comments down below. Well, let me know your thoughts on this bike. If you're an owner of a Trident 660, let us know your ownership experience. What do you guys think, especially this whole, you know, engine cutting out issue? And yeah, as always, take care of yourselves, ride safe, and I will catch you guys in the next video.